Today I'll be showing you how to use border prints, which is my absolute favorite type of fabric, to make 3 different unique designs. I'll be making wide leg pants, a gathered skirt, and a sheath dress. Border prints are where the print is on one edge or both edges of the fabric, and it has a really great look. We'll be cutting out our pattern pieces on the cross grain. This basically means that the pattern pieces need to be cut perpendicular to the selvage instead of parallel. Keep in mind that the cross grain isn't as strong as the straight grain. You might find that the garment doesn't drape or stretch as well. For this reason, it is best if you use a pattern that's structured and doesn't rely on drape or stretch, or it might look a bit strange. Border prints are best placed on the long straight edges. This can be at the hem for dresses, pants and skirts, or on the neckline. Let's get started. Sewing a border print into a big gathered skirt is my favorite way to use this type of fabric. Today we'll be using Simplicity 8691 in a floral border print. I'm going to place the floral print on the hem of the gathered skirt. Normally this dress has a circle skirt, but I'm going to show you how to make a gathered skirt to get the best effect with the border print. The amount of fabric that you need depends on how big you want your skirt to be. I like to gather at least 3.5 times my waist length on the skirt. I like the width of the fabric to be at least 125 centimeters so that you can cut the bodice at the top and cut a T-length skirt on the border. For each of these pieces we need to draw a cross grain line. Take a set square or something with a right angle. Place one side on the grain line and use the other edge to draw a perpendicular line. We will align this cross grain line on each of the pattern pieces with the selvage of the border print. Next I'm going to figure out the length of my skirt. Take your skirt piece. If your skirt is a simple circle skirt like mine, then you can simply measure down the length of the side seam and use this measurement as the length to cut. I'll be using a length of 75 centimeters. Be careful to check the hem allowance. Mine is only 1.5 centimeters, which is what I'll use for this skirt. This is the best hem allowance to use. Border prints tend to start straight off the selvage, so you can't have a big hem allowance without cutting into the lovely print. Before you start cutting, you need to check that the length of the bodice and skirt will fit onto the width of your fabric. Place the back piece of your bodice at the very top of your border print. Add the height of your back piece with the length of your skirt. Make sure that this is less than the width of your fabric. Grab some paper, preferably tracing paper if you have it. I find the best way to accurately cut a seamless border print skirt is to make a template beforehand. Make a rectangle with the length that you want for your skirt. The width of this rectangle should be as wide as possible. Place the bottom of the rectangle on the selvage at the start of the print and pin. Pin all the way around the rectangle. For this first cut into the fabric, I'm going to cut along the bottom and top of the rectangle to represent the length of the skirt. I'm also going to cut along the side of the template to make a nice straight seam in the future. Take out the pins. Move the template along the selvage of the border to the next uncut area and place the lower edge on the selvage again. Pin into place. This time we're going to cut at the top and the bottom of the rectangle. Repeat this process until you make one long and even rectangle. Now we move on to cutting the bodice. I've got plenty of fabric above the border to cut each of the bodice pieces. If you need to cut out 2 copies of a piece, simply fold the fabric lengthwise and place the selvages together. Place the pattern piece on top. Use a measuring tape to make sure that the length from the selvage to the cross grain that you made is the same down the length of this arrow. Pin the pattern into place and cut out this piece as normal. My back bodice piece needs to be cut on the fold, so once again I'm going to fold the selvages together lengthwise, just enough to place this piece on top. You don't need to match the cross grain in this case, simply place the pattern directly on top of the fold and pin and cut out. I've sewn up the bodice of this dress, so we can now work on the border print skirt. I'm going to make a few markings to help me spread out the gathers evenly. At the top edge of the skirt, make a marking at about 1.5 centimeters from both of the corners. This represents the seam allowance for the zipper, which must lie flat. We will start and end the gathering stitch here. Fold the fabric in half and make a marking at this point. Fold the fabric in half again and make a marking at the quarter points. I'm going to stop and start sewing at each of these points to spread out the gathers. Change your stitch length to the maximum on the straight stitch. Pull out some thread from the machine before and after you sew. Sew at 1 centimeter and 2 centimeters on the top edge of the border print. Do not backstitch. Take a thread from one end of each of the gathering stitches. Pull these threads gently as you push the fabric along. Gather all along the top edge of the skirt. We'll now match the length of the skirt to the bodice. My skirt has a zipper on the side, so this is where the seam of my skirt will be. We're going to measure from the side seam to the side seam. For me, this is 38 centimeters. Since this represents half of my skirt, I'm going to adjust my gathers so that half of the skirt is 38 centimeters. Once you've done this, knot together all the strings so that the length will stay the same. Push the gathers around with your fingers until they're even. The width of the skirt will now match the dress. Place the halfway marking for the skirt on top of the side seam of the bodice and pin. Pin the entire skirt into place. Sew the skirt to the bodice at 1.5 centimeters. Carefully unpick all the gathering stitches. This seam is quite thick, so you'll need to cut the seam allowance in half. Then finish the raw edge. From here onwards, you can follow the pattern instructions for adding the zipper to the dress and hemming the skirt. I used an invisible zipper and hand sewed an invisible hem. Another creative way that you can use border prints is for wide-legged pants. The pattern I'm using today is McCall's M7786 View B, which is a plain wide-legged pants. The wide leg at the bottom lets us show off the border print. In terms of fabric quantity, you can estimate the amount of fabric that you'll need by measuring the widest point of the front and back pant pieces and multiplying by 2. For most people, a fabric width of 115 centimeters will be wide enough for the pant legs, but double check that your pants will fit on the width of your fabric before you sew. I'm going to cut the pant pieces and pocket pieces on the cross grain, so I need to draw on the cross grain arrow. It's best if you draw the cross grain close to the bottom of the pants. Do this for all the pant leg pieces. Before you cut the fabric, you'll need to make your height adjustments and shorten the hem to less than an inch. In this case, I'm cutting each of the pieces individually so that I can make the best use of the print. I'm going to place the bottom of each of the pant legs flush with the selvage. Make sure that you place the bottom of the pants at the same distance to the selvage. Once again, make sure that the cross grain you drew is parallel to the selvage and the entire pattern is flat. Pin the entire pant leg and cut it out. Repeat this process for each pant leg. I'm going to place the pockets and waistband pieces on the end of the opposite selvage so that the print matches up with the top of the pant legs. When you're done, you can sew up the pants as normal. The pants look great, they could even pass for a skirt. The border at the bottom of the pants looks beautiful as I walk. Border prints aren't just limited to big skirts, you can also use border prints for sheath dresses. If your border print is quite big and spread out, then you can use the border on either the top or the bottom of the sheath dress. Today I'm going to make a sheath dress in Simplicity 8448. I'm going to place the border print at the top of this dress since it's quite big and will create an interesting effect. You can see that the nice print will show at the bodice of the dress. The fabric is wide enough to cut out the long pieces of the sheath dress on the cross grain. Check that all the pieces will fit beforehand by measuring the height of the longest piece and comparing it with the width of the fabric. If your dress pieces are too long for the fabric, then consider shortening the length of your dress or choosing a wider fabric. The amount of fabric that you'll need will depend on your size and how complicated the dress is. I suggest measuring the widest point of each of the front and back pieces and multiplying this by 2. Take each of the pattern pieces for the sheath dress and draw a cross grain arrow at both the top and the bottom for the long pieces. Do this for the facing and strap pieces if you have them so that the print will match. I'm going to place the pattern pieces flush with the blank selvage. This way the top of the dress will cut into the colourful border. Move your pattern pieces around to see what works for you, but try to place the hem of the skirt in around the same distance to the selvage. Use a tape measure to align the bottom cross grain that you drew on this piece with the selvage. Pin the bottom of this piece to the fabric. Move the fabric up. Lie the piece flat and align it with the selvage at the opposite end of the fabric. Make sure that the pattern piece isn't pulling or too loose anywhere, or you may need to realign the top cross grain with the pattern. Pin the rest of the pattern to the fabric and cut this piece out. We'll repeat this process for all of the long sheath dress pieces. For the facing and strap pieces, I'm also cutting these pieces out on the cross grain. I'm going to cut them on the colourful border so they'll match the top of the dress. Now sew this dress up as normal. A little creative border print placement worked out great for this sheath dress. The contrast of blank at the bottom to big flowers at the top is really unique and stands out. Today we learned 3 great ways to use border prints. I hope you use my ideas on your own projects to get creative. This is a really great print and it works for many different types of garments. Please like and subscribe if you'd like to see more. Thanks for watching!